familiar train at the Gare de Lyon railway station in Paris, France. It glides along familiar tracks, picking up familiar passengers and heading to equally familiar destinations. Only one thing unfamiliar awaits it ahead: a horrific accident. And today, let's make a genuine effort to learn about a railway disaster that shook the beautiful capital Paris nearly 40 years ago. And before we get into the main content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as well as show support for our team and Kanha. Let's dive into today. On the afternoon of June 27, 1988, the train departed from Milan on a 75-minute journey to Gare de Lyon, carrying passengers with tired faces after a long day of work. Initially, the train glided smoothly along the tracks toward one of the familiar stations on the route, Levé de Marsan. However, due to recent adjustments in the summer schedule, the train no longer stopped at this station. But just as the train passed the station, an unwanted incident occurred. A passenger in the second carriage suddenly stood up and pulled the emergency brake hard, causing the entire train to stop abruptly. In the driver's cabin, the driver Daniel Solange faced an extremely challenging situation caused by the emergency brake activation. He and the ticket inspector Jean Bovet quickly moved to the area between the driver's cabin and the first passenger carriage to check the brake system. Solange noticed the brake lever was stuck tight and immediately reached for a nearby handle to try to free it. However, when he returned to the driver's cabin, the brake system remained locked. At this point, the driver believed that too much compressed air had accumulated in the brake system after the emergency brake was activated. So he thought that manually releasing some compressed air would fix the issue. Instead of reporting the incident to management as per regulations, Solange and Bovet decided to release the compressed air from the brake systems on all sat-in passenger carriages on their own. When Solange returned to his seat, everything seemed to have returned to normal. He continued to steer the train toward Gare de Lyon. But what Solange didn't know was that he had inadvertently created a dangerous chain of events originating from the problematic brake system. At this time, the train was running about 30 minutes behind schedule. Solange received an order to stay at the last stop before entering Gare de Lyon. So they passed through Maison-Anneau station without slowing down. A critical decision that would later be thoroughly analyzed. Meanwhile, at Gare de Lyon, a suburban train was delayed at platform 2 because the ticket inspector had not yet arrived. The first carriage of the train was right next to the main staircase leading down to the underground platform, so most passengers chose to sit in this carriage. While waiting, passengers continued to board, making it more crowded than usual, and the carriage gradually became packed. Everyone felt uncomfortable due to the train's delay. Over there, the train driven by Solange was speeding toward platform 2 at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. The warning signal lit up, indicating the approach to the station entry section and requiring the driver to slow down. But when Solange braked according to the signal, a horrifying reality struck. The brake system was almost ineffective, only reducing the train speed from 96 to about 45 kilometers per hour. Immediately after, gravity overcame the weak brake system, causing the train to accelerate again. Weighing up to 300 tons, the train raced like an out-of-control beast with only the crowded station less than 1 kilometer away. Fear began to overwhelm Solange. In a state of extreme panic, the driver quickly contacted the control room. "Stop everything, my train has lost its brakes." Instantly, a piercing alarm bell rang throughout the control room and the driver's cabins of all nearby moving trains. The emergency shutdown procedure was activated, paralyzing the entire railway network. All trains in the area near Gare de Lyon came to a simultaneous halt, awaiting further instructions. However, this emergency shutdown procedure also cancelled the previously established route switching orders. Although the signal operators knew clearly that an out-of-control train was speeding in, they couldn't determine exactly which of the 4 trains approaching the station it was. Because Solange hadn't managed to communicate clearly before it was too late. Aware of the impending disaster, Solange decided to leave the driver's cabin and run along the carriages,
shouting as he ran to ask passengers to move toward the rear of the train in preparation for an imminent collision. But this action also meant he lost all contact with the control room. At the same time at Gare de Lyon, the ticket inspector for the suburban train finally appeared.
However, the piercing alarm bell had disrupted all communications,
causing him and the train driver to be completely unaware of the imminent danger. At 7:08 p.m., the train lost control and roared into the station. The passengers on board panicked, pushing and shoving each other, running toward the rear of the train to cope with the impending horrific collision. Station staff did their utmost to warn everyone, but the train was approaching at terrifying speed, and there was less than a minute left before the accident would occur.
Just a few short seconds before the tragedy struck,
the evacuation order for the train stopped at Platform 2 was issued.
Ticket inspectors and some lucky passengers managed to jump off the train in time, but the brave train driver remained at his post to continue announcing the evacuation for the remaining passengers.
Meanwhile,
Solange's train was rushing forward at a horrifying speed.
And then, what had to happen, happened.
The out-of-control train collided head-on with the train parked at the platform.
The impact was so strong that it sent the train cars flying and pierced through the station's foundation, creating a terrifying and utterly haunting scene. At the scene,
2 train cars lay motionless. They were crushed like loaves of bread, with the locomotives jammed into each other. Witnesses of the accident were stunned into silence upon seeing this sight. Rescue forces arrived at the scene just 10 minutes after the accident. Passengers on Solange's train were fortunate to escape, suffering only minor injuries.
But over 60 people on the train parked at the station sustained serious injuries.
Many were trapped in the wreckage and had to be hospitalized for emergency treatment.
More heartbreakingly,
some could only be rescued after doctors were forced to amputate parts of their bodies. The incident immediately caused a public outcry.
The people of Paris were shocked, unable to understand why all safety procedures had failed so disastrously, and what had truly led to this tragedy.
A large-scale investigation was immediately launched to answer these questions,
focusing on the cause of the brake system failure and why the train diversion measures had not worked.
Initially, it was suspected that this could be an act of terrorism. This suspicion grew when investigators discovered that the main brake pipe valve had been closed,
and this completely cut off the compressed airflow, disabling the brake systems of all cars behind the driver's cabin.
Although the terrorism hypothesis was raised,
investigators believed that only those with in-depth knowledge of the train's brake system could carry out such a sophisticated act. They quickly focused on finding the person who had pulled the emergency brake and called for public help to verify this person's identity. Eventually, a 21-year-old mother came forward and confessed to her actions.
She was on her way to school to pick up her 3 young children, unaware that the train no longer stopped at La Pure's emission station due to schedule changes. So she hastily pulled the emergency brake to get off the train, avoiding leaving her children waiting alone at the station.
The young mother's action was determined to be irresponsible but not an act of sabotage. She was fined for this behavior. However, upon closer examination of a previous interview with Solange, investigators uncovered crucial details.
Solange had attempted to reset the brake system behind the first car.
While fumbling to address the issue, he inadvertently placed his hand on the main brake pipe valve for support.
And this unintentional action caused the critical valve to close without his knowledge.
Yet, this discovery raised a major question. How could the train still continue moving when the main brake pipe valve was faulty?
Although there was a safety mechanism designed to automatically lock the brakes when the main valve was closed,
Solange was able to restart the train with the help of the ticket inspector by unlocking each brake on every car. He did not know that once the main valve was closed, compressed air could no longer be supplied to the brake system. This meant only the first of the train's 8 cars had braking capability. Despite the limited braking ability, investigators found there were crucial opportunities to prevent this tragedy. But those opportunities were unfortunately missed. Specifically, the station operator had instructed Solon to skip Mai's En Phu station and proceed directly to Gallian to make up for lost time.
Mai's En Phu station was on flat ground, just a few kilometers from the downhill slope to Gallian.
If the train driver hadn't been instructed to skip this station, he would have had another chance to detect the brake issue and safely stop the train by simply cutting power. Adding to the long list of unfortunate mistakes, Solon did not use the train's electric brake. He believed the electric brake was rarely used because it was unreliable and could wear out brake pads too quickly. Therefore, he didn't even consider using it in this emergency situation.
Additionally, when activating the alarm bell in the cabin, Solon did not clearly identify himself and his location,
which confused the controller, who had to manage multiple trains simultaneously and determine which one was in trouble. The situation worsened when Solon decided to leave the cabin to alert passengers, interrupting the only means of communication with the control room. When he couldn't respond to calls from the control room, everything became even more chaotic.
Regarding the emergency shutdown procedure, it was triggered by the very alarm bell that Solon activated, inadvertently disabling the pre-programmed routes, preventing the train from automatically switching to a bypass track and ultimately leading to the catastrophic collision at Sengasu 2. As the investigation delved deeper, the true cause of the tragedy gradually became clear.
It was due to human error involving poor judgment and disregard for important safety regulations. The National Railway Authority conducted a comprehensive safety overhaul,
including installing advanced internal communication systems so passengers could directly contact the driver,
installing separate emergency brakes for drivers, enhancing railway staff training, and modernizing the radio network to comprehensively strengthen railway safety.
The catastrophic collision plunged the entire city of Paris into mourning with 56 fatalities. 4 years after the accident, Solange was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison, with 3.5 years suspended.
Thus, he served 6 months in prison.
The ticket inspector who caused the delay in the suburban train's departure was also convicted of involuntary manslaughter and received a 2-year suspended sentence.
However, the station controller was acquitted of similar charges.
The railway company was also exempt from criminal liability but had to compensate the majority of civil damages to the victims and their families.
The 1988 Gare de Lyon train accident is a painful reminder that even a small human error can lead to unimaginable consequences. This incident leaves profound lessons about responsibility, caution, and the importance of strictly following safety procedures in all operations, especially in the transportation sector, where human lives are always the top priority.
Now, Han Na bids you farewell and looks forward to seeing you in future videos.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.